Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephanie Bree. Today's episode of the Video Game Collector's Guide, Buyer's Guide, whatever you want to call this. I keep changing the name, I apologize for that. We're talking about the infamous SNK NEO GEO AES. What is the AES? I don't remember what the letters stand for, but it's basically the home console version of the MVS, which was the multi-video system or something like that. Basically, it's an arcade machine in your living room. Now, this video is going to... this could have been a 30-second video where I said, yeah, win the lottery, buy a Neo Geo. I could have just done that, and that would have been literally all the information you need to know about the Neo Geo. You have to be a rich bitch to own this motherfucker. Back in the day and today, you do not own a Neo Geo. You will not own a Neo Geo. And you're probably never going to see a Neo Geo unless you're wealthy. Those are the facts. So let's get that out of the way. Who's this for? Die-hard gamers. Like, die-hard gamers who have massive-ass bank accounts. That's who the Neo Geo was for. So let's get that out of the way. What is the Neo Geo? Well, it's an arcade machine in your living room. It's 100% identical to the actual arcade. It was literally designed to be the same chip, the same RAM, the same graphics processor, the same controller. They took the arcade, shrunk it down into a box, plugged it into your TV, and sold it for you an astronomical amount of money in 1990. It was $1,000 in 1990, which is like about the equivalent of $3,000 or more today in today's money due to inflation. You had to be fucking mega rich to own a Neo Geo back in the day. As a result, I have to warn you, the system did not sell well, and because it was expensive back in the day, and it's scarce by today's standards, they're still hella expensive on the retro scene because no one can fucking afford them. And they didn't sell well, so they are collector's items. That being said, because of that, your modern options are fairly limited in regards to authentic hardware. You're not likely to find retro clones that are compatible with Neo Geo cartridges. That ain't gonna happen. If it does, it's a mega expensive hardware retro clone, which might be maybe cheaper than buying an actual Neo Geo, but I don't know, because I know nothing about the retro market in regards to Neo Geo compatible hardware, because the only thing I've ever read, I don't even remember if it came to fruition or not, and it was going to be hella expensive. Now, there have not, to my knowledge, been any retro plug-and-play micro consoles or mini consoles or anything of that sort that play Neo Geo software. So, a lot of your options to play Neo Geo games, you have two options. Option one, the compilations. SNK, or whoever owns the copyright and trademarks today, the IP, has released a shit ton of Neo Geo Classic software and various compilations, basically on every console since the Neo Geo. They were on PS1, they were individually released as arcade ports on SNES and Genesis, Sega CD, PlayStation, Saturn, but the compilation started around the PS2 era, so the PS2, PlayStation 3, 4, 5, Xbox, etc., etc. You can get these games. You can get most of them individually on the Wii or the eShop on the Wii U. I think you can also get some of them elsewhere through legitimate means, like the PS3 store. But you can also buy discs that collect the games. So you can get, like, the King of Fighters collection, the Samurai Showdown collection, the Metal Slug collection, etc. So that's your best bet for getting to experience these games. I would recommend the PS2 versions because those discs are relatively inexpensive compared to some of the other ways to get these games. And the PS2 controller, while not authentic compared to the actual Neo Geo controller, you can get arcade joysticks for the PS2, but also the PS2 controller is adequate. It'll do the job. You know, it's got 4 buttons. The Neo Geo had 4 buttons. It's got a joystick. The Neo Geo had a joystick. So it'll do the job. Now, option B, which I mention every time I do one of these videos, is emulation. Now, fortunately, again, as I've mentioned a couple of times in previous videos, the Neo Geo basically used fairly industry standard hardware. It uses basically the same CPU that's in the Genesis and the CPU as its coprocessor that's in the Master System. Now, it's the more, overclocked version of that CPU, but it's the same. It's a 16-bit processor with an 8-bit coprocessor. And it's the same one. It's the Motorola 68000 and the Zilog 80. Those are the 2 chips that are in the Neo Geo, which are 2 of the most emulated chips in video games because it's one of the 2 of the most common CPUs that was used in computers and arcades and etc. That is to say, emulation is very thorough, very complete, very robust. You have options. Now, there are dedicated Neo Geo emulators. Stay away from them. They're going to give you a headache. Your best bet is MAME, the multi-arcade machine emulator. That's your best bet if you're not going to go the compilation route. Now, either route you go, you're not giving money to SNK or whoever owns the IP unless you're buying like modern compilations on like PS5, I guess, Xbox, whatever the fuck it's called, Series something or other. But those are your best options. If again, you're not, related to Elon Musk or you didn't win the fucking lottery. Those are your best options. Or, you sell your house and live in a cardboard box, but you own a Neo Geo. I mean, if that's the way you want to live your life, who am I to judge? It sounds like I have animosity towards Neo Geo, but I don't. I, like most kids my age at the time, wanted one desperately, but couldn't afford it. I had to make do with Sega Genesis ports of Neo Geo games, later Super Nintendo and Sega CD ports, but they were close enough at the time. However, there is another caveat I have to mention, which is another reason why the Neo Geo does not have mass appeal back in the day nor today to modern collectors. And that is because at least, bare minimum, 70% or more of the software library are 2D fighting games. And that's not an exaggeration. If there were 100 games on the Neo Geo, 75 of them were fighting games, if not more. That is not an exaggeration. It's a lot of World Heroes and King of Fighters and Samurai Showdown and Darkstalkers and stuff like that. You have a handful of other games. You got some, you have a couple of beat 'em ups. You have a couple of sports games. You have the run and gun metal slug games. But by and large, if you buy a Neo Geo, you're going to be playing first 2D side-scrolling fighting game, one-on-one fighting, Street Fighter 2 Mortal Kombat style fighting games is what I'm getting at. If you love fighting games, and I mean love, love, love fighting games, you're going to want to get the Neo Geo library. Because the King of Fighters, the Samurai Showdown, those are some of the best fighting games ever made. Those two franchises are fucking... That's where... If you're a fan of fighting games, you're playing Samurai Showdown. You're playing King of Fighters. You're playing World Heroes. And Art of Fighting. Those are the games you're playing. They're all on Neo Geo. Those are Neo Geo games. Those are staples of the Neo Geo. Now, if you're not a fan of fighting games, or you're a casual fan of it, you like Street Fighter 2, you like Tekken, you like Mortal Kombat, but that's as far as you go, stay away from the Neo Geo. You are not going to find enough software to satisfy you. Because like the 12 games that aren't fighting games, probably only 2 or 3 of them are going to appeal to you. Because the Metal Slug games are all fine games. They're basically the same game over and over again. Not trying to be facetious, I'm just being honest with you. The Neo Geo is a fighting game haven. Very little else. There's 0 role-playing games on the Neo Geo. There's 0 2D platformers. There are... I don't even think there's any racing games on it, to be honest. There might be one, maybe. Maybe. I don't even know 100%. There's a few side-scrolling beat-em-ups, but there's no platformers. There's no strategy games. There's no role-playing games. There's no turn-based games. There's no Sims. It's very, very, very heavily fighting games. Now, the hardware is hella expensive. You're looking at $400, $500, $600 and up for working AES hardware. On top of that, the controllers are expensive, and you have to have a CRT because this thing does not have any options of hooking up to a modern television, and well, that you're gonna want to because it doesn't upscale. Unless again you're rich and you get it retrofitted with like component or HDMI, which again, why bother? But anyways, that's an option if you want to spend that kind of money, but the cartridges themselves are astronomically expensive. You're looking at $200, $300, $400, $500 and up per title. So even if you have the $1,200 to invest in a Neo Geo, you're getting the machine, 1 controller, and at most 2 games. It ain't worth it. If you have $1,200 to invest in retro game consoles, get an NES or an SNES or a Genesis or anything else just about than a Neo Geo. Because your money ain't going to go very far and you're going to be disappointed if you're playing 3 different versions of King of Fighters. You're basically playing the same fucking game. Which is not worth the price of admission. I'm just going to be honest with you. In 1990, if you were rich, it was because you were playing actual arcade versions of the games at home. But that novelty is no longer, really fucking who cares at this point. Like, you could get the actual arcade versions on your PS2 and any game console made after the PS2. So it's like, what's the appeal? Nostalgia if you had one back in the day, but, beyond that, morbid curiosity. I don't recommend buying a Neo Geo. Not the AES. We'll talk about the Neo Geo CD in a future video. That's a different story, slightly different story. But who's it for? The insanely rich. And I mean insanely rich. This isn't for the middle class. This isn't for the working class. This isn't for the poor people. This isn't for your average Joe. Your average Joe cannot afford to collect for the Neo Geo. You just can't. And because of that, there's not a lot of aftermarket options. There really isn't. At least none that are, relatively affordable. You know what I mean? You're still paying out the ass. Because even if you get a fully compatible NEO Geo Retro clone, you still have to pay the astronomical price of admission for the software. Again, it ain't worth it. It just isn't. If you're going to invest that kind of money, buy the MVS and get the actual stand-up arcade machine. Because at least then you have something to brag about. An actual arcade in your home. Not a, slightly inferior but way more expensive arcade console in your living room. That's at most a talking point. And no one's going to be impressed other than, look how rich I am. Which, who are you trying to impress if you have that kind of money? You're not friends with poor people at that point.